Hello. We are talking about our reading skills today, and the one we are highlighting is visualization. Now, you can probably figure out what visualization is by the title. It's visualizing. So, seeing things in your mind. People sometimes call it making a mind movie. Um, so, sort of converting the text that you're reading into images in your head. That's visualization. And, it's strange. You need to start really purposefully doing it before it becomes a habit. Though you'd think it comes easily, for some people it just doesn't. But it is really important for reading. It helps you with recall of what you've read, helps you engage with what you're reading, and it helps you comprehend or understand what you're reading. And I find that fascinating. Just from making pictures in your head of what you're reading, you're actually hitting all those important reading skills. So, visualization can be really, really helpful. So, what is it, in a deeper sense, and how do we do it? Well, it's using really all five senses. So not just seeing things, but you can think about what the characters are smelling. Like at the seashore, it has a different smell than in a musty castle, right? So smelling what they're seeing, what you're seeing of them, uh, if they're eating, what they're tasting, all of that, what they hear. So the environment, the setting, is visualized through that, through the character's point of view, and from your point of view. So it can get really complicated when you sit down and think about it, but when you put it into practice, it becomes easier and easier, and it becomes a habit. You just do it and you don't even realize you're doing it. So you want to look at adjectives. Adjectives are going to be your best friends on visualization. They're going to tell you, you want to visualize a man. Okay, that man could look like anything. If they tell you that he's a Native American man and he's 6 feet 7 inches tall, I mean, then all of a sudden you've got a more specific view of that man. So the adjectives really spur visualization on. And it takes you from being what we'd call a passive reader, someone who just is reading the text, doesn't really engage with it, doesn't remember it afterwards, to an active reader, who is someone who is engaged with the text and will therefore remember what they've read later. Because you can remember, it's interesting, you can remember things with your senses better than you can remember just from reading them, right? So, like, you'd remember a movie with more clarity than you would remember a book if you're not visualizing that book. Um, yeah, they call it making a mind movie. So you're you're turning the book into a movie in your head, and seeing and hearing and smelling and tasting and listening and all the stuff that you put into visualization helps you remember and engage with it at a deeper level. And it's then like watching a movie in your head. And one of the exciting things I find with visualization is just that move from general to specific. So when you start, um, the first time we meet Dracula, we may have a really specific image of him because, let's face it, I mean, this book has been adapted a million times. None of them are like the book, by the way. I don't know why no one adapts it like the book, but So there are lots of cinematic vampires and Dracula himself that we're surrounded with, and we would come up with that image, someone else's image basically in our head. But as we read, and I'm going to read this passage a little later on that describes what Dracula looked like to Jonathan Harker. Suddenly, it's not someone else's image of what Dracula looks like. It's your image based on the adjectives that Bram Stoker is using. So his image passes into your image, and there are going to be differences. I mean, everybody's going to visualize him differently. But if you are sticking to the adjectives in the text, there's going to be a lot of similarities as well. And I think you'll find, if you haven't read that passage that we're going to get to, it's not a Dracula that we're used to seeing. He's very different than in most movies. So we're surrounded by media all the time, and so we're used to visualization being done for us. When you read, you have to do it yourself, and sometimes it's really anchored in your knowledge, your prior knowledge. What do you know about vampires? That's going to start you off. What do you know about Dracula? That's going to start you off with that first fresh image that then you refine by continue reading. And you actually can visualize after you've read something as well. When you're thinking about it, you may sort of edit how you're visualizing something. So it doesn't just take place while you're reading, but after you're reading as well. And another really interesting part of visualization is that you can visualize, if you can use that word, the emotions that are going on. So you can become aware of how Jonathan Harker feels when he finds that he's trapped in the castle, how he feels when Dracula puts his hand on his shoulder. So that emotional element is also part of visualization. So it's a really exciting process, and hopefully it's one that you do use when you're reading. But if not, again, it's really helpful with remembering and understanding what you've read. So I definitely want you, if you don't do it already, to start purposefully thinking, what does this look like? What does this person feel? Those sorts of questions. You might have to actually, write down questions, or, think of questions beforehand, or however you want to do it, so that you start the process until you become used to it. And if you are doing it already, then I hope that you can expand what you're already doing. Make a even better picture of what you're reading. Get that emotional part in. Get all the five senses going, and you're going to enjoy it better, and you're going to remember it better, and you're going to understand it better. So, I am going to read a section from Dracula. It's one that is in chapter 2, about the middle, I think, maybe towards the beginning of chapter 2. And if you watched, I did a sort of model reading of part of chapter 2. It's a video that you can find on the site. So it'll be familiar if you've watched that, because it's out of that section. I wanted to get something a little later on to get some more characters involved, but I just kept coming back to this passage because it's so good for visualization, and because it's surprising. What you end up visualizing is not the Dracula you think you know. Okay, so we're going to read, or I'm going to read, basically page 27, starts at the bottom of page 26. His face was a very strong, aquiline, with high bridge of the thin nose and peculiarly arched nostrils, with lofty domed forehead and hair growing scantily around the temples but profusely elsewhere. His eyebrows were very massive, almost meeting over the nose, and with bushy hair that seemed to curl in its own profusion. The mouth, so far as I could see it under that heavy mustache, was fixed and rather cruel looking, with peculiarly sharp white teeth. These protruded over the lips, whose remarkable ruddiness showed astonishing vitality in a man of his years. For the rest, his ears were pale, and at the tops extremely pointed. The chin was broad and strong, and the cheeks firm though thin. The general effect was one of extraordinary pallor. Hitherto I had noticed the backs of his hands as they lay on his knees in the firelight, and they had seemed rather white and fine. But seeing them now close to me, I could not but notice that they were rather coarse, broad, with squat fingers. Strange to say, there were hairs in the center of the palm. The nails were long and fine and cut to a sharp point. As the Count leaned over me and his hands touched me, I could not repress a shudder. It may have been that his breath was rank, but a horrible feeling of nausea came over me, which, do what I would, I could not conceal. The Count, evidently noticing it, drew back, and with a grim sort of smile, which showed more than he had yet done his protuberant teeth, sat himself down again on his own side of the fireplace. We were both silent for a while, and as I looked towards the window I saw the first dim streak of the coming dawn. There seemed a strange stillness over everything. But as I listened, I heard, as if from down below in the valley, the howling of many wolves. The Count's eyes gleamed. Okay, so, a very descriptive paragraph. I understand that there are some big or unknown or archaic words in here. Let me do my best to point them out if I can. Growing scantily, his hair grows scantily around his temples. That means that it's thin, there's not much there, but profusely elsewhere. Profusely means a lot. So he has a lot of hair. His eyebrows again they have a profusion. That's the same thing as profusely. It means there's a lot. His lips protruded means they came out in front of. Protruded. Pro means sort of forward and truded. So his teeth are over his lips. And ruddiness is redness. I have a very ruddy face for whatever reason. But his ears were pale. So think of the distinction there. Pallor is paleness. And that's the general effect, he says, is one of extraordinary pallor, even though he's very ruddy. So it's kind of a strange friction between those two, but he also originally sees the hands as white and fine, meaning sort of thin and, pale, but then finds that they're not. And they actually have, I think the creepiest thing is that he's got hair in the center of his palm. Anyway, protuberant teeth comes up again. Protuberant means that they are visible over the bottom lip. Okay, so I think that's all of the troublesome words, but think of what this um, mental image of Dracula is like. It's not it's not the Dracula we're used to, right? He's got all this hair, um, a domed forehead, and yeah, he's got pointy ears, and he's got pointy teeth and pointy fingernails. That stuff we're used to, but the hairiness, I think, is very strange. His his eyebrows are big and meet in the middle, and his hair all over his hands, and it's profuse, so he's got a lot of hair everywhere. That part we don't normally think about Dracula. So these are ways in which you can take the adjectives, take your prior knowledge, and sort of work from that prior knowledge to more something that's more in line with what's being described on the page. So this is a very different Dracula, but this is the original Dracula. I mean, yes, he existed in um, folklore and some people say in history as Vlad the Impaler, but this is the first real Dracula work put down on paper and published to the masses. So it's interesting that it's so different from what we're used to. Okay, so your assignment this week, I I would love for you to gather some images um, of how you view some of these settings and characters. Unfortunately, right now we don't have a lot of different characters. I don't know if many of you have moved on to the point where we're meeting the women of the story, but then we get some great description of them as well. Um, yeah, so collect from the internet. You can draw it yourself. I'm not sure how you get it to me. I'm gonna look into that. I think there's a way on Google Classroom that I can make like a slide, they call it, and you can paste pictures to it. But if you're just working on your phone, that might be difficult. So I understand if it's not feasible given your technology. Um, but yeah, I wish we were in the classroom because then I could see. I know a lot of you draw really well, and see what you would come up with. Um, so yeah, add some um, passages from the text of why you see it that way. What are the adjectives in the text that lead you to visualize the castle in this way or this character in this way? And yeah, that'll be your assignment for this week's reading skills. And yeah, I really hope that a lot of you, some of you, at least one of you, can can find the means to do it because I think it would be really interesting. And the only thing I ask is just don't just look up like characters from movies about Dracula. Actually work with what you find in the text and try to find pictures that represent that visualization in your head. Okay, so if you're not used to this, if you're not used to visualizing what you read, really start to get used to it because it is such a good tool and it's really pretty easy. You just have to stop every now and then and think, okay, what is the picture here? What are the emotions going on? What's the sense imagery, the five senses? And what do these people and places look like? And because we remember something like a movie better once we sort of convert the text into a mind movie, then we're going to remember it better. All right. So that's it. That's your assignment. That's your reading skill for the week. Okay, great. Keep on reading, guys. Thanks.